Thanks everyone for joining us today. Happy to be presenting this webinar on the perils of single-tenant SaaS. This is Mark Parry speaking, VP of Sales and Marketing at CloudOps. Happy to have Nick Mariano with me from Bolti Systems, who's a cloud architect. We worked multiple projects together, and we'll be taking you through the perils of single-tenant architecture today. So quickly about CloudOps, we've been providing solutions for web-based companies leveraging private cloud and public cloud since 2005, focused on infrastructure solutions. We've got a lot of experience helping software organizations move to a SaaS model, a lot on how to channel that innovation, get the most out of the teams, and we provide the 24/7 operations. And we've been getting some awards over the years to recognize our growth. As well, like that, we're really focused on profit center organizations that are taking their software to the market, and that's their main business. So in the ways that we help organizations, it's either making use of cloud infrastructure that already exists, often a public cloud like Amazon, Azure, Cloud SCA, or a multi-cloud, providing the workloads across multiple instances or multiple cloud environments. Really customize the cloud strategy suited to customers' business and technical needs. And as our customers operate their code, do code deployments, we provide the rest on the managed services side. Also, in the case of private cloud, if your organization needs to own and operate its own cloud, whether it's for regional requirements, security, unique performance characteristics, we've got reference architectures designed by the experience of operating clouds, both on the major open source projects of Apache Cloud Stack and OpenStack with our partners Accelerate and Moran. Some reference customers in a variety of spaces. But with that, I'll hand it over to Nick.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for that introduction. So my name is Nick Mariano. I'm from Bolti Systems. I'm the cloud architect at Bolti Systems. A couple of quick slides about what we do. So we're SaaS experts, and we help you transform your business. We work with ISV organizations trying to migrate over to the SaaS. More specifically, we're involved with SaaS architectures. We help you design your architecture. We help you implement that as well through software development. We can look at your continuous integration and delivery pipeline, put that in place, optimize it, and as well help you out with SaaS business strategy, your pricing, get the most out of your offer, essentially. So the objective of today is really to talk about the perils of single-tenant SaaS. So in our day-to-day operations, we do come across many different types of architectures, and so we're still seeing a lot of organizations that are using the single-tenant SaaS model. And so we'd really like to point out some of the advantages that exist via multi-tenancy. And this is what this presentation is about. It's about unlocking the power of the cloud through multi-tenancy. So let's get started on that. So just a couple of slides on basic terms and definitions so we're all on the same page. So when we talk about single tenancy, that's really it's an architectural paradigm where all the infrastructure, all the processes, all the data, all that is dedicated to one tenant. So essentially the architecture is tenant agnostic. It doesn't have any consideration for users if they belong to different clients. It's all treated as one big user base. When you compare that with multi-tenancy, that happens to be on the opposite side of the continuum. So multi-tenancy is really just another architectural paradigm where infrastructure and processes are shared by all tenants. So that means that the architecture is aware of the tenants so the users of the tenants where they belong. So we'll start off by saying that in our view, if you're doing true SaaS, then it's really multi-tenant. It has to be multi-tenant by definition. So when we talk about the cloud, the promise of the cloud 10 years ago in the early days, we talked about elasticity, about cost flexibility, some of the important points about what the cloud has to offer. So we do feel that multi-tenancy plays very well with that, and it delivers on those promises much more than single tenancy does. So let's dig down into the details of this and see why that's so. So I'm going to start off with just a very simple architecture, and we'll compare the two if we were to implement this architecture using single tenancy versus multi-tenancy. So as you can see on this graph, we have single tenancy on the left and multi-tenancy on the right. On the left-hand side, you can imagine a very simple architecture. It's a web-based application. It's got two application hosts, could be application servers or just some other kind of processes running business logic. And it's got the back-end database server. And you'll notice as well, there's redundancy built in here. So you have two application hosts, two database hosts, and there's replication going on. Now, if you're a company and you're a SaaS organization and you're deploying in single tenancy, then as you license your product to more and more tenants, what you're going to do is to simply create more silos for every tenant, and all of your infrastructure will be dedicated. When you compare that to the right-hand side, using the same capacity model, this is a multi-tenant architecture. So using the same 16 tenants, those 16 will share the same set of infrastructure. So in this case, you can see that we have those 4 application hosts and those 3 database servers. And one of the first things you'll see is that there's a dramatic reduction of hardware needed to serve the same traffic that is generated from these 16 tenants. So of course, comparing that onto the left side with the single tenancy, you're going to end up having 4 times 16, so that's 64 hosts versus those 7 on the multi-tenancy. So if you add in those load balancers, you get a difference of 80 on the left-hand side and 8 on the right side. So as you can imagine, if we start looking at your costs to implement this, there's going to be some dramatic differences that are going to emerge. So here's a graph that shows what your monthly hardware cost per tenant would be. So you'll observe the red line on top. You see that it's a straight line. So regardless of how many tenants you acquire, your costs will be fixed, because every time you acquire a new tenant, you create a new island or a silo, and you have dedicated infrastructure. That's not the case, obviously, with multi-tenancy. So with multi-tenancy, the blue line, you can see that after your first couple of tenants, the costs will dramatically go down. And as an added bonus, you'll see a general tendency to go down, not in a straight line, but there's a general tendency for the cost to go down as you acquire new tenants. So this shows very important differences between the costs of single and multi-tenancy. If you take this organization now that has these 16 tenants and now goes to 32, so they've doubled their business, you'd have to account for the fact that your costs in a single tenant environment will be double. So in this particular case, we'll have $81,000 extra cost per month to serve that doubling in traffic. Not so with the multi-tenant architecture. So we've just added a little bit less than $5,000 in extra costs. So while it's a positive problem to have a doubling of revenue, the company, this particular SaaS organization would be in a position, would have to be able to support the cash flow that comes with those extra expenses. And if you annualize these, then they could become pretty significant cost savings. So this is what you would see for single tenant architecture. It'd be close to $1 million in extra costs. So you would be saving this with a multi-tenant architecture. So what's important here is not so much the numbers, because obviously every different architecture will vary. So we're just using a particular price model from Amazon, giving particular hardware to serve this kind of traffic. Obviously, individual architectures will be very different in terms of cost. But the constant here will be the fact that there's going to be some very dramatic cost savings that you'll have if you're going to use the multi-tenant environment. So obviously, when we design architectures, we want them to be multi-tenant from the start. And we do have certain principles that we like to follow. And these are the 3 principles. So we believe in having the one environment, the share everything infrastructure, and having the one software version. So let's go over these 3 points and show you what strategic advantages that you can have from this philosophy. So we talk about the one environment. we've already seen the dramatic reduction of hardware costs. But what wasn't really shown in that graph was where those costs are coming from. So part of them are from hardware, but licensing costs also have an important bearing on the total cost. So a lot of software vendors are still they're still using a licensing model whereby it's a per core price. So if you're going to be licensing by the core, then a multi-tenant architecture can use that to its advantage, because what it means is that the cost of that core and the use of that core is being split by as many tenants as possible. So you're really optimizing the cost of that license. So that's really one of the reasons as well is why you're saving so much with that one environment principle. Of course, there's also indirect costs. Having a smaller footprint that the multi-tenant architecture gives you does have a reduction of manpower, so that's going to translate into reduced costs. Something that's closely related but slightly different is the idea of having shared everything infrastructure. So shared everything infrastructure is the gateway to having fine-grained provisioning and really enabling true elasticity. So what do I mean by that? Is that when you're provisioning for a multi-tenant environment, what you're really looking out for is to be able to use the capacity for the aggregate demand. You're not going to have it for just one single tenant, but you're looking for aggregate demand. And you can play on the fact that you have tenant A and tenant B. They're not both peaking at the same time, generally speaking. And so what you have is a borrowing of resources between these two tenants, provided that they have different peak patterns. So that's going to allow you to scale very cost effectively, because it means that you will probably end up needing less hardware really to meet the aggregate demand of all your tenants together. The opposite end of the spectrum is to be able to serve those small accounts in a single tenant environment where you have to create a brand new silo, brand new island of infrastructure and dedicate it for that one tenant that happens to be a small tenant. It's going to be hard to be profitable for those. Not so with a multi-tenant architecture, because what it ends up meaning is that it could just be a drop in the ocean in terms of extra traffic, and there could be no differences in provisioning whatsoever. Shared everything also gives you the ability to quickly onboard and offboard tenants. So what that means is if you've got licenses that you're using seasonally, maybe you're selling a license that's just 1 month out of the year, so you're able to quickly onboard them and offboard them without needing to set up infrastructure. So that is also a very cost-effective way to handle this. And the last point is the one software version. So one software version, so it's going to be hard to quantify in dollars, but we can see that if you're going to have the one software version via multi-tenancy, then your engineering team can have better focus. So I can speak as a former software developer, having to support many different branches in a SaaS organization, and the truly time-consuming effort that is, and it's error-prone to be able to fix bugs in older branches and making sure that they're propagated everywhere. If you have the one software version, then your engineering team could really be much more focused on that one branch. That leads to better quality control, and it opens up the door to doing real, true continuous delivery, where you're just continuously delivering to that one software version. Of course, there are other gains as well. Your operational team can be better focused. So, if you have just that one set of behavior to worry about, that could lead to better SLA performance. So really, the idea is to have no tenant left behind. All tenants are using the same version. So in summary, the single tenancy, we feel, is not a sustainable model for growth. It doesn't really make much of a difference at the 1 or 2 tenant level, but as you're growing your company, it's going to erode your margins and erode your competitiveness. You can also make the argument that single tenancy on the cloud is kind of the worst of both worlds when you compare a classic owned infrastructure versus the cloud. So, with single tenancy, you're not leveraging much of what the cloud has to offer. You're losing on elasticity. And then you can make the case then, am I better off just owning the software? So you're really not getting the benefits that the cloud promises you to give you. Now, having said all those nice things about multi-tenancy, there are caveats, of course. So there are barriers for organizations that want to transition to a multi-tenant environment. One of the biggest things we see, obviously, is your architecture. Sometimes we're dealing with legacy architectures that are designed as single tenant. In some cases, that could be a significant barrier. There are ways to modularize the changes so that it's easier to convert legacy architectures into multi-tenant, but that can certainly be a barrier. We've also seen incompatible technologies. So we've had clients where they're using particular products that really don't play nice with multi-tenancy. And then there's a whole bunch of new problems that arise that have to be dealt with intelligently. Data leakage. If there's any kind of if you're serving data, if you're sharing infrastructure and you're mistakenly serving data from other tenants, that could be a serious problem. That does not exist in a single tenant environment. Security breaches, service outages are magnified now, now that you're in a multi-tenant environment. And as well, you'll need to consider things like app ops, application operations. So this is a software layer that allows you to manage multiple tenants, to be able to stop them, start them, onboard them, things like that. And of course, if you want to truly leverage multi-tenancy, continuous integration and delivery has to be considered as well. So if you want to use the latest techniques. So we see this complacency setting in some of our clients that we work with, and they're kind of get off this highway of multi-tenancy and they go back to single tenancy. And this is where obviously we can help. We can help you with the architecture and plan for multi-tenancy. And sometimes what you need in an organization is somebody from the outside that's able to champion these ideas and to drive these. Sometimes they'll fail when they're tried internally. Having an outside team can help you with that. The way we work is we can be embedded in your team to deliver on those promises and really help you navigate some of the challenges that we've seen and achieve multi-tenancy. So as part of attending this webinar, we have this offer for you to get in touch with us, and we can offer you a free consultation and assess your current status in terms of your readiness for multi-tenancy. There's also a white paper that we'll be distributing to all of our attendees. This talks about really in much greater detail the math and the reasoning behind why we advocate multi-tenancy in much greater detail. So you'll all be receiving that as part of having been part of this webinar. So we'd just like to leave you off with this last slide. If you're on the journey to SaaS, we don't want you to stop doing that. You still want to get on as soon as possible, but we are there to help you to navigate through that and to implement multi-tenancy.
Thank you very much, Nick. That's great. I really do want to encourage everyone who's looking at moving to SaaS or has already started that even if you're in single tenant today, to start selling that, getting the sales team, the compensation model, the pricing, all out there and working, because that organizational change and getting that message out to the market that you are now a SaaS provider is a critical step in making the move. All right, so we're going to take some questions from the audience. So first one we've got here is talked about one software version principle. What do you do if your tenants don't want to upgrade? Nick?
Yes. Yeah, so that's a good question. So this comes to somewhat more of a political problem where we have, you're a smaller SaaS organization, you're dealing with a bigger client, and the client is the one that's setting the agenda. So we're advocating here for the one software version principle. Sometimes there are exceptions to the rules. So if you do have situations where there's one tenant that wants to drive the agenda, what we would recommend in this case is making exceptions. So there are ways to segregate your tenants into other groups so that you can deal with these exceptions where it's just politically impossible for you, as possibly as a smaller SaaS organization, to set the agenda for the upgrades.
And I think another one that's related to that, Nick, is that's related to the breaking point of that approach. Using a one environment principle, does that scale?
Right. So that's a good question. So this is actually something that's addressed in the white paper. So as kind of simplify this in this webinar, obviously there's going to be a breaking point. As you start having more and more tenants, and it's going to depend on your particular application, your particular SaaS application. We do think that there's going to be a point where you will have to segregate this into multiple multi-tenant environments. Now the thing is that you're still benefiting from multi-tenancy. It's just that instead of having 100 single-tenant environments, you might have a handful. You might have 2 or 3 to be able to better segregate the traffic, either because you've got tenants that don't want to upgrade at the same time, or it just becomes unmanageable after many tenants.
Right, and Nick, one question I hear a lot, and it's really resonating with the sales role here, is related to containerization, virtualization technologies, and they're asking here, is this a good way to achieve multi-tenancy?
Right. Yeah. So we get that a lot. So Docker being very popular these days. So the thing is, Docker. The point of Docker was not invented to solve multi-tenancy. Though yes, indirectly, we know of cases where in more simple situations you can solve using Docker. The thing is that you're still not going to get the same benefits that you will with multi-tenancy. So it's a way to kind of, if you're dealing with just a couple of tenants and it would just be too expensive to re-architect. In some situations, even virtualization on the low end can help you out. But you're still not getting a lot of the benefits we mentioned, the sharing of the hardware. So multi-tenancy goes a lot further in terms of cost reduction than those technologies out there. Now, having said that, of course, using Docker as part of a multi-tenant architecture makes total sense. So in other words, use it for what it's meant to be. So to be able to use its environment portability, all these good things that Docker gives you. So do use it as part of a bigger architecture, but don't use it necessarily as a replacement unless you're just dealing with a couple of tenants.
Great. Well, that's it. Thanks everyone for your time and attention and the great questions. And please, we'll be reaching out to you with the white paper as it comes available, and don't hesitate for any follow-up and taking advantage of the free consultation.